Last week, I was sitting in a high-end airport lounge in Zurich, sharing a table with a man who seemed to vibrate with a very specific kind of professional energy. He was a senior strategist for a global NGO, and he spent 20 minutes explaining the spirit of dialogue, the grand theme for Davos 2026. He spoke about it with a polished, almost religious fervor, describing how we were finally moving toward a unified global consciousness. He showed me a sleek interface on his tablet, a prototype for a mandatory digital identity wallet. He called it a passport for trust, his eyes gleaming as he explained how it would nudge citizens toward more pro-social behaviors for the sake of the planet. To him, this was the ultimate expression of progress, a world where every conflict could be smoothed over by the right technical adjustment. He seemed convinced that the spirit of dialogue was a bridge to a better future. But then the overhead monitors turned red. A massive software failure had grounded every flight in the terminal, a byproduct of a decaying, overcomplex system that hadn't been updated in years. The man who had just been preaching about global empathy and inclusive communication didn't look for a dialogue with the stressed gate agents. Instead, he slammed his tablet onto the marble table and began berating the staff, demanding to know why his priority status wasn't being recognized. In an instant, the veneer of the sophisticated global citizen vanished, replaced by a raw, frantic sense of entitlement. That sudden shift, from a visionary talking about planetary boundaries to a man unable to handle a minor systemic failure without lashing out at the lower tiers, was more than just a personal outburst. It was a perfect microcosm of the world the Davos elite are currently building. While they prepared to discuss the spirit of dialogue in their alpine retreat, the physical and social infrastructure of the world they manage is quietly falling apart. This disconnect reveals a deeper truth. The dialogue isn't meant for us. It's the operational code for a new kind of post-democratic governance, a system where the technical administration of data assets replaces the messy human reality of actual politics. We are being ushered into a state of anomie, where the people in charge have forgotten how to build a bridge, but have become experts at building a panopticon. That opening scene, it just sits in your stomach, doesn't it? It captures a very specific frequency of anxiety that I think, we are all feeling right now.
It really does.
It feels like we are living in a moment of intense, almost vibrating friction. On one side, you have this high-flying rhetoric coming out of places like Davos talk about unity, dialogue, seamless integration, and planetary consciousness.
Right.
And on the other side, the literal systems we rely on, the flights, the energy grids, the basic social trust in our neighborhoods, seem to be fraying at the edges.
It creates a profound sense of vertigo. It's the sensation of being told everything is under control and that we are marching toward a utopia by the very people presiding over a breakdown.
A breakdown, yeah.
And our mission for this deep dive is to look past that vertigo. We are going to unpack the intense ideological and structural conflict that is shaping the mid-2020s. We aren't just looking at Davos as an event that's too superficial.
Right, it's a symptom.
It's a symptom. We need to understand why the man in that lounge behaves the way he does and why the systems around him are failing. It's about getting to the root cause.
And to do that, we have pulled together a stack of materials that are, frankly, explosive. We aren't just reading the press releases. We have the analysis of the 2026 Davos agenda itself, specifically this nebulous concept of the spirit of dialogue. But we're contrasting that with some heavy theoretical texts. We've got James Burnham's Managerial Revolution, which is wow. And we're looking at the Dark Enlightenment or NRX movement. And we have technical reports on surveillance capitalism and digital identity from the Council of Europe.
The core theme we are tracking here is a collision, a three-way crash, really. First, you have the incumbents, what we call the managerial elite, represented by that strategist in the airport lounge.
The guy with the tablet.
The guy with the tablet, exactly. Second, you have the reaction to them, a rising, somewhat terrifying movement called the Neo-Reaction or NRX, which is proposing some pretty authoritarian solutions to fix the mess.
Peace.
And third, the backdrop. A massive expansion of digital surveillance that affects you, the listener, regardless of who wins the political argument. It's the infrastructure being built while everyone is fighting.
Okay, so let's get right into the diagnosis. We need to understand who these managers are. Because I think people hear manager and they think of their boss at a retail store or maybe a middle manager in an office. But we're talking about something different, something structural.
A whole different class of person.
Yeah. To set the stage, I want to share a story I found in our research notes. It's about a man named Klaus,
Klaus is the perfect archetype for this. His experience grounds the theory in reality.
Yes. So I was scrolling through some forums on urban policy, just doing some digging, and I came across this account. Klaus is, or I should say, was a veteran urban planner in a major European capital. For 30 years, his world was concrete, literally concrete. Load-bearing capacities, traffic flow, measurable safety standards. He was a true meritocrat. If the bridge stays up, you did a good job. If the traffic flows, you succeeded. It was binary.
The world made sense. There's a clear cause and effect.
100%. But as we move through into 2026, Klaus describes a strange, quiet revolution in his department. He found himself slowly, almost imperceptibly, pushed out of the decision-making loop. He wasn't replaced by a better engineer. He wasn't replaced by someone with more experience building bridges. He was effectively replaced by a coordination liaison from a well-funded partner NGO.
A coordination liaison? I mean, what does that even mean?
It means nothing, right? This new supervisor didn't talk about structural integrity. She talked about semantic alignment and global equity frameworks.
So this is the critical shift from the physical to the rhetorical, from building things to talking about building things.
Exactly. Klaus realized that the old world of representative accountability, where you answer to the taxpayers for the roads being paved, had been swapped out. He was now in a network of unelected bureaucrats who prioritized ideological loyalty over technical competence.
He was being judged on a whole new set of metrics that had nothing to do with his actual job.
And looking at Klaus's story, I felt this wave of sympathy. It's not just about losing a job. It's about enemy. When the rules of the game change from what can you do to who do you agree with, the foundation of achievement just crumbles. It really illustrates the structural shift from representative democracy to a managerial revolution where unelected bureaucratic elites utilize the NGO complex to replace traditional meritocratic standards with ideological loyalty under the guise of global governance.
That story is the perfect entry point into a theory that was written back in 1941, but honestly, it reads like it was written this morning. It's by James Burnham, titled The Managerial Revolution.
Okay, let's unpack Burnham, because usually when we talk about power in the West, we have this binary. We talk about capitalists versus workers, the guys who own the factories versus the guys on the assembly line. That's the framework we are taught in school.
Right. That's the traditional Marxist view, and strangely enough, it's also the traditional capitalist view. Both sides agree on one thing, that ownership is where the power lies. If you own the means of production, you're the one in charge.
Forward.
It seems straightforward, but Burnham saw something else happening. He argued that as the world became more complex, as we built these giant corporations, massive government agencies, and international bodies, the people who actually owned things were losing control.
Explain that mechanism. If I own stock in Apple, or if I'm a voter owning the government through my vote, don't I have the power?
Burnham says no. And think about it practically. If you own, say, 100 shares of Apple stock, do you tell Tim Cook how to design the chip architecture for the next iPhone?
Not.
Do you tell the logistics head how to route the supply chain from Vietnam? No. You are a passive owner. You just want the dividend or for the stock price to go up. You have surrendered the actual operation of the company to the managers.
Okay, that makes sense on the corporate side.
And the same thing happens in government. You vote for a president, but do you decide the specific regulations the EPA puts out? Do you manage the day-to-day operations of the Department of Transportation? No. That's all done by a permanent class of administrators. The real power shifted to the people who manage the technical and administrative direction. This is the managerial class.
So the managers are the ones who know how the machine actually works. The owners are just along for the ride.
They're diffuse, disorganized. The managers are concentrated, organized, and they control the levers. And Burnham's key insight was that this class extends way beyond corporate executives. It includes government commissioners, bureau heads, and crucially for our discussion NGO strategists like the one in your opening story.
The guy from Zurich.
Exactly. Their goal isn't necessarily profit, like a capitalist, or wages, like a worker. Their primary goal is social dominance and the preservation of the organization itself. They want the organization to grow, to become more complex, to become indispensable.
That creates a weird incentive structure, doesn't it? If I'm a capitalist, I want efficiency because it makes me money. If a process is wasteful, I cut it. But if I'm a manager...
You want complexity. You want more layers of management because that increases your status and your budget and your headcount. This is why the coordination liaison who fired Klaus exists.
Right. Her job is complexity.
Her skill set isn't building bridges. Her skill set is managing the narrative about bridges. She justifies her existence by creating new rules, new language, new frameworks that only she can interpret. If the problem is solved, she is out of a job. If the problem is managed perpetually, she has a career for life.
So the incentive is to never actually solve the problem. It's to create a permanent administrative apparatus around the problem.
And this leads to a concept we found in the notes called Anarcho-Tyranny. Now, that is a heavy term. It sounds like a contradiction. How can you have anarchy and tyranny at the same time?
Yeah, that doesn't immediately click for me.
It was coined by the political theorist Samuel Francis, who was heavily influenced by Burnham, and he used it to describe a very specific state of affairs. Anarcho-tyranny describes a state that fails to fulfill its most basic duty enforcing laws against violent criminals or maintaining basic public order.
Okay, that's the anarchy part.
That's the anarchy part. You see it in the subway systems that aren't safe, or the epidemic of shoplifting that gets ignored because the paperwork is too burdensome for the managers and the police department to deal with. The hard stuff, the messy stuff, gets left to fester.
But the tyranny part.
While the state ignores the chaos, it aggressively micromanages the law-abiding citizens through bureaucracy. The managerial state finds it too difficult or politically risky to solve hard problems like crime or infrastructure decay, so they focus their immense power on soft targets.
So, to put it in perspective, if I get mugged on the subway, the police might not show up because the system is overwhelmed and, it's just one more report. But if I try to replace a window in my historic home without the right sustainability permit issued by the Historical Aesthetics Committee, I get hit with a massive fine and a stop work order immediately.
They regulate the process because they can't secure the outcome. It's a simulation of governance. They can't stop the violent crime, but they can definitely measure the width of your window frame to the millimeter and penalize you for any deviation.
Okay. And this connects directly to the crisis of expertise thread we pulled from Reddit. There was this fascinating discussion analyzing why the general population has just stopped trusting experts.
Yeah.
And it's not just, some kind of dumb anti-intellectualism.
It is rational. The source material highlights what it calls a legitimacy gap. For decades, the mantra of the managerial class has been, trust the experts or follow the science. But the public has memory. They keep a scorecard.
And the experts don't have a great track record lately.
The sources list some brutal examples. You have the Iraq War sold by intelligence experts, the best and the brightest, as an absolute necessity based on data that turned out to be completely wrong. An entire war based on a faulty premise.
And then there's the 2008 financial collapse.
Right. Where the economic experts, the guys with the PhDs from the best schools, the heads of the Fed and the Treasury, said everything was fine right until the moment the floor fell out from under the global economy.
They didn't see it coming, and they were the ones supposedly watching the gauges.
They didn't see it, or they saw it and didn't say anything, which is arguably worse. And the most recent wound, of course, is the COVID response. The source notes how public health guidance shifted rapidly, sometimes week to week.
Absolutely, I remember this vividly. First, don't wear masks. Then you must wear masks.
And look, science changes. That is how the scientific method works. You get new data, you update your conclusions. But the problem was that these shifts were often presented not as updates, but as corrections to a moral failing. And worse, they were sometimes based on resource management. We don't have enough masks for frontline workers, so we'll tell the public they don't work, rather than pure science.
And every single proclamation was presented with the same absolute religious authority.
They didn't say, we aren't sure, but here is our best guess based on what we know. They said, this is the truth, and if you question it, you're a bad person, you're dangerous.
And when you burn your credibility like that, expertise stops looking like truth-seeking. It starts looking like a status game.
Precisely. Expertise becomes a badge of membership in the elite class, a shibboleth you use to signal you're on the right team, rather than a measure of competence or a commitment to finding the truth. It's about maintaining social authority.
Which brings us back to Davos 2026, the spirit of dialogue.
The dissonance. The elite are there in their alpine retreat talking about planetary consciousness and high-minded moral imperatives. But to the average person, the so-called populist backlash, it looks like a closed loop. The elite are talking to each other while the trains aren't running and the cost of living is skyrocketing.
And they see the problem differently.
The populists view the current crisis as an infrastructure challenge. Fix the bridge. Fix the economy. The elites view it as a communication problem. Fix the narrative about the bridge. If people are upset, it's not because things are bad. It's because they have been misinformed by bad actors.
And that disconnect creates a vacuum, doesn't it? If the managers are incompetent and focused on their own status, and the regular democratic process feels broken because the bureaucracy runs everything anyway, people start looking for alternatives.
Dangerous alternatives.
And some of those alternatives are, well, they're pretty radical.
That brings us to the reaction to the other side of this ideological war.
We need to talk about the Dark Enlightenment, or NRX. This is a term that's been floating around the edges of the internet for a while. Very niche, very underground. But our sources suggest it's moving into the mainstream, specifically through figures connected to Silicon Valley and even parts of the new political administration.
The Dark Enlightenment, or Neo-Reaction, NRX, is essentially the antibody to the managerial state. But, and this is crucial for you to understand, it is not conservative in the way your grandfather might be conservative.
It's not about lower taxes and family values and, the Republican Party platform from 1980.
Well, it doesn't want to go back to 1950s American democracy. It wants to undo the Enlightenment itself. The intellectual grandfather here is a computer scientist named Curtis Yarvin, who writes under the name Mencius Moldbug. There's also the philosopher Nick Land.
And their core argument is, it's pretty shocking to modern ears.
Their core argument is that democracy is incompatible with freedom.
Wait, incompatible. We're usually taught they're synonyms. Democracy and freedom, that's the brand.
It's the brand, yes. But NRX argues that democracy inevitably leads to decline. They believe that if you let everyone vote, the majority will eventually vote to loot the productive minority. They see it as a system that incentivizes short-term thinking, emotional decision-making, and ultimately civilizational decay.
So they view the values of the Enlightenment, equality, democracy, universal rights as degenerative.
As a virus. Yep. They see these values as a political virus that eats away at social order, competence, and hierarchy until you get the managerial chaos we have now. For them, the scene in the Zurich airport is the inevitable endpoint of democracy.
And they have a name for the system that spreads this virus, right? The Cathedral?
The Cathedral is their term for the managerial elite we just discussed, but specifically it refers to the consensus-generating mechanism. It's the prestige universities, the major media outlets, and the civil service.
So Harvard, the New York Times, the State Department.
NRX argues that these institutions function like a decentralized state church. There is no pope giving orders from the top, but they all preach the same sermon. They all enforce the same orthodoxy.
So if you go to Harvard or read the New York Times or work in the State Department, you are downloading the same software. You're learning the same language, the same set of acceptable opinions.
You are downloading the same progressive orthodoxy. And if you dissent, if you challenge the core tenets of that orthodoxy, you are excommunicated, you're canceled, you're labeled a heretic.
So the Cathedral enforces safety to suppress any ideas that threaten its power.
It creates a reality where you cannot think outside the approved parameters without being socially and professionally destroyed. It's a system of thought control that doesn't need soldiers in the streets because it has HR departments and Twitter mobs.
So if democracy is the disease and the Cathedral is the vector, what is the NRX cure? Because looking at the notes, it sounds like they just want a king.
Yes, but a very specific kind of king. Yarvin proposes the GovCorp model. He argues we should stop pretending the state is a charity or a community and start treating it like what it is, a corporation.
Run the country like a business.
Run it exactly like a business. You replace democratic governments with a structure that looks like Apple or Amazon. You have a national CEO or a monarch. This leader has absolute authority. No parliament, no bickering Congress blocking the agenda. The state is run to maximize value, security, and long-term prosperity.
That sounds incredibly authoritarian. It sounds like a dictatorship.
It is hard authoritarianism, and they would argue that's a good thing. Their argument is that we are currently living under soft totalitarianism, the managerial state that nudges and nags and cancels you into submission. The NRX argument is that at least a CEO has an incentive to keep the country prosperous and safe because they own it, they have equity.
A politician only cares about the next election.
A politician only cares about the next election. A CEO, in theory, cares about the stock price in 20 years. It forces a long-term perspective.
Our sources mention a specific concept called rage, which feels appropriate given the mood.
RAGE. It stands for Retire All Government Employees. It's a proposal for a hard reboot of the administrative state. You fire every single bureaucrat. The Klaus from our first story, the liaison who fired him, you clear them all out.
The whole managerial class.
The whole class. You replace them with a small number of loyalists, or increasingly, you simply automate their jobs with AI. The sources point to current events, mentioning figures like J.D. Vance and proposals for a Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, as real-world manifestations of these ideas entering the White House. This isn't just fringe internet theory anymore, it's being discussed as actual policy.
So instead of trying to fix the bureaucracy, you just delete it. But what if I don't like the national CEO? What if the GovCorp treats me badly? In a democracy, I can vote. Here, I'm just an employee, or worse, a customer with no rights.
That's where the concept of patchwork comes in. NRX doesn't necessarily envision one single world government. It envisions a world of thousands of competing city-states or corporate fiefdoms.
So if you don't like the rules in Amazonia, you can just pack up and move.
You move to Googletown, or Christian Republic, or anarcho-capitalist Cove. The idea is that these mini-states would have to compete for citizens, for taxpayers. If a GovCorp is tyrannical or incompetent, it will go bankrupt as all its productive citizens leave.
This is the shift from voice to exit.
Exactly. In a democracy, you use voice, you vote, you protest, you complain on Twitter, you write letters to your representative. NRX says voice is useless against the Cathedral. It's a rigged game. The only real power is exit. You take your tax dollars and your talent, and you leave.
And this is why so many Silicon Valley figures are interested in this stuff.
It's the ultimate engineer's mindset. And it's why Peter Thiel and Patrick Friedman are so interested in seasteading, building autonomous floating cities in international waters. These are prototypes for the patchwork, test labs for new forms of governance, free from existing laws.
It's a very sci-fi vision. It sounds like something out of a William Gibson novel.
That's not accidental. This movement is heavily influenced by a concept from Nick Land called hyperstition. It's the idea that fictions, specifically science fiction, can shape reality, that they can become self-fulfilling prophecies if enough people believe in them and build towards them.
So they treat books like Snow Crash or The Sovereign Individual not as warnings, but as blueprints.
As instruction manuals, they're actively trying to summon this future into being.
I'm the red pill. That term is everywhere now.
It's the central metaphor, taken from the Matrix, waking up from the comfortable illusion. For NRX, the Matrix is the belief in democracy and equality. Taking the red pill means accepting what they see as the harsh reality, that hierarchy is natural, that some people are meant to rule and others to be ruled, and that order is more important than liberty.
Okay, so we have the managerial state failing to maintain infrastructure, but obsessed with narrative. We have the NRX reaction, wanting to turn the world into a series of corporate dictatorships. But there's a third piece to this puzzle, a mechanism that is being built right now, quietly in the background, regardless of who is in charge.
The digital panopticon, the plumbing for whatever system comes next.
This brings us to our second narrative anchor. I want to talk about Sarah.
Right, the woman from the smart district.
Exactly. I saw a video clip online the other day, a day in the life of a young woman named Sarah living in a smart integrated district in London. And she was trying to buy a train ticket, but her digital identity app kept flashing this soft amber light.
Not a heart, no, just a warning.
Just a warning. And in the 2026 Davos landscape, we see the rollout of agentic AI as a fix for the collapse of organic social trust. Sarah wasn't being punished for a crime. Rather, her behavioral footprint didn't match the week's sustainability dialogue. Her AI agent, the thing that manages her life, had restricted her travel credits because her recent digital purchases suggested a low participation score in local community initiatives.
So she didn't volunteer for the neighborhood cleanup or something like that?
And suddenly, she can't travel. She's no longer a sovereign legal subject with a right to movement. She is a monitored data asset. And watching Sarah's frustration, I felt a chill. We talk about the digital panopticon as this high-tech, abstract concept, but for Sarah, it's just the cold reality of a world where a handshake or a reputation no longer matters.
Only the cryptographic verification of her data speaks for her.
While these systems are framed as ways to make life frictionless and convenient, they actually strip away the human element of trust, replacing the soul of a citizen with a series of green and red check marks managed by an invisible hand.
That narrative really drives it home. It illustrates the implementation of digital identity and agentic AI as a technocratic compensation for the collapse of organic social trust, effectively transforming the citizen from a sovereign legal subject into a monitored data asset within a digital panopticon.
Sarah's situation is the nightmare scenario of digital identity. And our source from the Council of Europe gives us the technical reality behind this. We are shifting from a digital persona, which is just a username you create for a website, to a digitized legal identity.
And what's the real difference there?
A username is a mask. You can take it off. You can have 5 of them. A digitized legal identity is a tattoo. It binds your biological self, your fingerprints, your face, your iris scan to your legal status as a citizen.
The source calls it the informational body. You become machine readable. Your very body becomes your password.
And if the machine can't read you, or if the machine doesn't like what it reads, like with Sarah,
then you face exclusion risks. The computer says no problem, but on a life-altering scale. If you don't fit the category or the algorithm flags you for some reason you don't even understand, you aren't just inconvenienced, you are excluded from basic rights.
You can't travel, you can't open a bank account, you can't access state services, you effectively become a non-person.
And the sources mention SIM registration as a huge part of this. And that feels like something that has already happened in so many places around the world.
It's the choke point. In many parts of the world, and increasingly in the West, you cannot have a phone number without linking it to your national ID. That single step destroys anonymity.
And it allows the state, or the GovCorp for that matter, to track your communication, your location, and even your financial transactions if you use mobile money. You are constantly broadcasting your identity with every move you make.
And this connects to Shoshana Zuboff's work on surveillance capitalism. I always find her work terrifying because she explains the economics of it. It's not just about control for control's sake. It's a business model.
Zuboff defines surveillance capitalism as a system that claims human experience as free raw material. Everything you do, where you go, what you say, how long you look at a web page, the tone of your voice on a call is translated into behavioral data.
But they always tell us it's just to improve our experience or show us better ads. That's the trade-off, right? I give you data, you give me a free map app.
That's the cover story. That is what Zuboff calls the uncontract. The real value isn't just selling you ads, it's fabricating prediction products. They are building models to anticipate what you will do, and not just anticipate influence. They want to nudge you, to modify your behavior at scale.
Like nudging Sarah not to take the train by raising the price or denying the ticket.
Or nudging you to vote a certain way by showing you a specific sequence of news stories. Zuboff calls the terms of service we all click agree on the uncontract. It's not a negotiation, it's a subjugation. You are surrendering your future self to be shaped by their commercial interests.
And now, with the rise of agentic AI, these AI personal assistants that manage your schedule and your wallet, we are outsourcing our cognitive sovereignty.
Cognitive sovereignty, it means the right and the ability to think for yourself.
If your AI agent decides which news you see, which products you buy, and which route you take to work, all based on optimizing some hidden metric, are you making those choices? Or is the system managed by the Cathedral making them for you?
You are losing the ability to be a moral agent. You are just a node in the network, reacting to stimuli that have been curated for you. You think you have free will, but you're just following a script written by an algorithm.
This brings the battleground right into our daily lives. It's not just about these big abstract government structures, it's about language and culture and family. And that leads us to our third story, about the Miller family.
The family from the Midwest.
Right. There's a narrative I've been following about a family in a small town in the American Midwest struggling with what the Davos critics call the Cathedral. This family, the Millers, found that the local school board was no longer listening to parental concerns about the curriculum.
A pretty common story these days.
But the reason was what's interesting. The school was following global pedagogical standards sent down from a supranational institution they had never even heard of.
Yeah, probably.
An NGO based in Europe. This is the spirit of dialogue in action, using complex, authoritative-sounding language to bypass national sovereignty. The Millers felt their family structure, which they saw as the primary defense against state overreach, was being dismantled from the outside.
And how was it being dismantled?
The school used semantic hijacking. They started redefining words. Words like safety and inclusion were twisted to mean that the state, not the parents, had the final say over a child's moral and ethical development. Safety no longer meant physical safety. It meant safety from harmful ideas, namely the ones their parents held.
Reading about the Millers, I can understand why some might see this as a radical overreach. From a more balanced perspective, it highlights a terrifying trend, the erosion of the private sphere. When the cathedral of global institutions reaches into the living room to redefine the relationship between parent and child, it creates a sense of total exposure.
As a creator who watches these trends, I see this as the ultimate loss of cognitive sovereignty.
Yeah.
If we cannot even define the values within our own homes because the language has been captured by a managerial class, then the last fortress of the individual has indeed been breached.
And that situation illustrates how the Cathedral of supranational institutions employs semantic hijacking and the spirit of dialogue to bypass national sovereignty and dismantle the core family structures that once served as the primary defense against state overreach.
The Millers are experiencing semantic hijacking. That sounds like a war tactic.
It is a war tactic. It's a war over meaning. This is a key tactic of the managerial state. You take words that have a positive organic meaning, words that nobody can be against, like dialogue, safety, inclusion, and you redefine them to enforce a specific ideological conformity.
Right, who could be against safety? I want my kids to be safe. But if safety is redefined to mean protection from ideas that challenge the consensus, then suddenly it becomes a tool for censorship. It's a Trojan horse.
Exactly. The source Spirit of Anime argues that the spirit of dialogue at Davos isn't about debate. It's about engineering consensus. It's a solvent. It dissolves the messy reality of local politics and genuine disagreement, and it replaces it with a top-down mandate.
It makes disagreement impossible, because if you disagree with dialogue, you must be a monster. You must be pro-conflict.
It frames you as the problem, and it bypasses national sovereignty. The Millers can vote for their school board, but if the board is just following global pedagogical standards, the vote doesn't matter. The decision was made in Geneva or Brussels, not in the local town hall.
This is institutional capture. The NGOs and HR departments operationalize these redefined terms. If you don't use the right language in the workplace, you're creating an unsafe environment. It's soft totalitarianism. It attacks the mind before it attacks the body.
So how do you resist? And if the managerial state controls the institutions and the language, and the NRX solution is to install a dictator, where does that leave the Millers?
It feels like being caught between a rock and a hard place.
The sources point to a concept from Václav Havel, the Czech dissident who stood up to the Soviet Union. He called it the parallel polis.
A parallel city, a parallel society.
The idea is that you don't try to storm the cathedral. You don't try to take over the institutions because they are designed to co-opt you. They'll corrupt you. If you enter the system to change it, you become part of the system. Instead, you build alternative structures. You build a parallel society that operates on different principles.
What does that look like in 2026? It's not like you can just go build a new town.
It's not necessarily physical. It looks like preserving the private sphere, the family. It looks like building local community bonds that rely on organic trust face-to-face interaction rather than digital verification from an app. It's homeschooling co-ops, local currencies, things that operate outside the official system. Intellectually, it means guarding your cognitive sovereignty. You have to cling to logic, to empirical observation. You have to refuse to be formatted by the algorithm. You have to read things you're not supposed to read. You create spaces where the cathedral's rules and its hijacked language don't apply, not by fighting them head on, but by ignoring them and building something better.
It's almost like going off grid, but socially and intellectually, not just physically.
It's about living in truth, as Havel would say. The source describes our current era as a civilizational winter. The elite are simulating order, pretending they're building bridges, while actually producing anomany, this normlessness. The resistance is to keep the flame of genuine human connection and clear thinking alive until the winter passes.
Guys, we've looked at the incompetent managers, the radical reactionaries, and the invasive technology. How does this connect back to the reality of Davos 2026?
We have to look at the dissonance of Davos 2026 source. There is a massive gaping chasm between the public theater and the private reality. On stage, they are talking about cooperation and climate virtue.
Spirit of dialogue.
The spirit of dialogue, yes. But in the boardrooms, in the back channel meetings, the investors aren't listening to that anymore. They are looking at the world and seeing fragmentation, conflict, and risk. They are allocating capital to national security, to reindustrialization, to securing supply chains, and to the massive power demands of AI.
So the money knows the dialogue is fake. The capital is flowing based on the reality, not the rhetoric.
The money knows the world is breaking into blocks. The green transition is morphing into an infrastructure supercycle. It's not about saving the planet anymore. It's about energy sovereignty and national survival. Investors aren't waiting for permission from the dialogue. They are building the infrastructure for a fragmented, dangerous world.
And China's role in all this?
China is playing a fascinating game. While the U.S. turns inward with America First rhetoric and fights these internal cultural battles, China is positioning itself at Davos as the responsible stabilizer of globalization. They are the ones talking about free trade and cooperation.
So they're filling the vacuum left by the West's identity crisis.
They're happy to step in and lead the system that the West built and now seems to be abandoning.
So we have this triangular conflict. Let's map it out one last time for you, just so it's crystal clear.
It's a useful summary.
On one point of the triangle, you have the managerial state. It's seeking to maintain control through dialogue, digital ID, and this kind of soft totalitarianism.
The world of Klaus's boss and the man in the Zurich lounge.
Exactly. On the second point, you have the NRX reaction. It's seeking to replace the managerial state with a hard authoritarianism, a GovCorp or a monarchy.
The world of the national CEO and rage.
And on the third point, you have the human element, the individual, Klaus, Sarah, the Millers, all of us, caught in the middle, facing this state of anomie and the total loss of agency.
That is the landscape. And it brings us back to that word, anomie. Normlessness. The feeling that the rules no longer apply, that the ground is shifting under your feet, the old social contracts are broken.
And everyone is trying to write a new one.
The managers broke the old one by abandoning competence for ideology. The reactionaries want to break it further by abandoning democracy for hierarchy. And the technology, the digital panopticon, is being built to manage the wreckage no matter who wins.
Odd that the surveillance infrastructure serves either master equally well.
The spirit of dialogue is revealed not as a bridge to the future, but as the operational code for a new kind of governance. It's a distraction. It's the pleasant music playing while the new walls of the prison are being built.
So for you listening right now, this is the takeaway. The dialogue isn't meant for you. It is a closed circuit. You are left with the realization that the people in charge have forgotten how to build a bridge, but have become experts at building a panopticon.